Cold open question of the week, Gary.
Yes, sir.
The aliens are attacking and they're targeting Scranton.
Okay.
What's the one thing you save for the sake of mankind? And, it can be a building, a natural resource, a pizza recipe, whatever it is. What are you saving?
Oh yeah, definitely. Andy's Pizza. Gotta save that.
It-
I mean, I know
That's
it's
what you're
not in
saving.
Scranton, but it's in that general area. So yeah, if I gotta save anything up there.
Andy's Pizza.
Yeah.
I will turn that question over to our special guest tonight, Sal Payne. Sal, what are you saving from Scranton?
It's funny you said Andy's because my thought immediately also went to food. So this is Scranton adjacent, but I'm like, oh, I got to save our Caros. I mean, I gotta get my Old Forge pizza. But if we're saying specific in Scranton, like maybe Cooper's, I might say.
All right. Well, at least we know future generations will have pizza.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sorry. Let's get started. Brian Lennon Show, episode 57. It's the one about the Neorealist in winter with author Salvatore Pane. All right, so welcome into another exciting episode of the Brian Lennon Show. I'm your host, Brian Lennon. As always, joined by my co-host, Gary McDaniel.
Hello, hello.
Hello, Gary. And tonight we are honored and privileged to have a very special guest. Very excited to have him on. His name is Salvatore Pane. He is an author of the upcoming book, The Neorealist in Winter. It's a collection of short stories. So welcome to the show, Sal.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on. I'm thrilled to talk on a podcast with alumni from my high school because I feel like that never happens. So what a small world.
So it's very interesting, Sal, because I think I've followed you on Twitter, maybe as far back as like 2009.
Wow.
And I don't know how you came into my feed or algorithm, but obviously something to do with Scranton had to do with it. And then you were an author and you were a writer, so I was kind of interested in following you, but kind of from a distance. So I never really just was kind of going back and forth. And then last week or 2 weeks ago, I was on Twitter, which I hadn't been on in really for a long time, except for like breaking news. I'll go on, and I saw you announce you were publishing your latest book, and I said, well, that would be a perfect time to have Sal on the podcast and finally get to connect. So it's so you are a graduate of Bishop O'Hara.
Oh, yes. I also went. So, I did Catholic school for 13 years. So, I was right there in the trenches.
Okay. Now, I only went to Bishop O'Hara my senior year.
Okay.
Which is, of course, when I met Gary, and we've been connected ever since. But Gary was a 4-year alum.
I was also 13-year of Catholic school myself. Yeah.
So. Gary, where'd you go to grade school?
So St. Cyril's and Methodius in Oliphant.
Okay, yeah. I went to St. Anthony's down in Dunmore. So, and I went to St. Mary's before that, just for a few years too.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think we played your school in Catholic basketball.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. And I know on the in the acknowledgments for the book, you acknowledged Mrs. Wetter,
yes,
Janine Wetter. So tell us a little bit about kind of what O'Hara meant to you, and kind of being able to reflect on it 20 years later, what it kind of has instilled in your life and your career and your relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still close with a lot of my friends from Bishop O'Hara. So much like you guys, I stay in touch with my friends. I was just on a phone call with one of my friends from O'Hara maybe last week, and we're just catching up, and he's still in the area, and he's moving now, and we're chatting about that. So the first thing that comes to mind are the friendships and the people and all that kind of stuff. That's a trite answer in some ways, but then Mrs. Wetter. I also felt very uncomfortable writing Janine Wetter in the acknowledgments, but I'm like, I guess I should. Mrs. Wetter seems weird to put in an acknowledgement, but yeah, she circled me out, or kind of like found me in a class where we had to do some assignments, some creative writing assignments, and I wrote something, and she, brought it up in front of the class, and she's like, wow, you really seem to have an interest in this, and a talent. And I had never really thought about that before. So, I've been very, very fortunate to have a lot of wonderful writing teachers, and she was the first one. She was the I'll really encouraged me, and I'll always be incredibly grateful for that.
So you really hadn't like grown up as thinking, oh, I'm going to be a writer, I'm going to work in publishing or some sort of, until Mrs. Wetter kind of called you out?
I always wanted to. So even when I was a little kid, I was very, interested in writing. And my mom, she went to Marywood, which is a college, and both of you know, I'm sure, but it's a college right by Bishop O'Hare. And she was an English major, and she wrote quite a bit, and she read a ton. And, so she passed that down to me, so I loved writing and reading. I was always reading. I read a lot of garbage though as a kid. Like I read a ton of Star Wars novels and just Lord of the Rings, and just like the corniest stuff. But I still like that stuff, to be quite honest, so I always kind of wanted to be a writer from that young age. But in school, I didn't always do especially well. So it seems like an idle fantasy more than something that could be real. So to get that encouragement from someone outside of my family, I had the encouragement from my mom and my dad too. But it was really great. So like, okay, maybe other people will think that this would work as well, so that was pretty cool.
Very cool. And it's, important the role a good teacher plays in your life and your career, wherever you go on to. And you are now also a teacher. Mm-hmm. You teach at St. Thomas University in St. Paul.
Yeah. And I always think about that. I always think about, the writing teachers I had, the encouragement I got, and I always try and pay that forward. And just, I try never to be harsh with the student. I'm sure I have been. I'm sure some of my former students will be like, what? He's definitely super harsh. But I feel like I always try and encourage, and try and find where the student is, and meet them there, because it can be life-changing, and I think it's humbling to be able to do it, so I always want to try and keep that in mind, even when it's hard. Like teaching during the pandemic was challenging and not fun, but yeah, there's so much good stuff about it too.
And writing too can be very personal, Mm-hmm. What I think is it Hemingway, open a vein and bleed or something. So, yeah. When students, I would imagine, are kind of expressing their innermost thoughts and feelings on paper, you have to kind of strike a delicate balance with that.
Yeah. I'm critiquing. Oh yeah. I'm always humbled that they're willing to put themselves out there, because in my creative writing classes, every student reads all the work by the other students, so they don't really have places to hide. So if they're going to write a really personal story or an essay or something, all their peers are going to read it. And I'm always blown away by what they're willing to admit to each other in that small room, so running the workshop, you really have to have a kind of delicate balance, and making sure, you can sense where the student is, making sure we're on track with the conversation, we're in the bounds, but generally I find that the students are really respectful of each other, especially here, so this is the Midwest. The students are almost too respectful when I try and prod them to be like, hey, what can we improve here? They're like, nothing. It's amazing. You really gotta prod them. Unlike back east, where I'm like, I did not have this problem when I was a student. Yeah.
They'll tell you 10 things that are wrong with it.
Yeah. Which you need sometimes.
All right. Sal, I'm going to just read kind of your biography from the Autumn House Press website for listeners, so they kind of know your background. So you were born and raised in Scranton, Pennsylvania. You're the author of 2 novels, Last Call in the City of Bridges and The Theory of Almost Everything, and a book of nonfiction, Mega Man 3. Your shorter work has won the Turow-Kinder Award, judged by Stewart O'Nan, was nominated for the Pushcart Prize, and has appeared in Indiana Review, American Short Fiction, Story Magazine, and many other venues. You've also written video games and graphic novels, and your textbook, Story Mode, Writing Narrative Video Games for Everyone is forthcoming from Bloomsbury. And you hold an MFA in creative writing from the University of Pittsburgh and currently serve as associate professor at the University of St. Thomas. And you live with your wife and Martin Scorsese, the cat, in St. Paul, Minnesota.
The funnest part is the cat of all of that. That's the stinger at the end.
Yes. All right. So I have a ton of notes and stuff I want to talk to you about, obviously including the book and the stories involved in there. Just touch a little bit more on our Scranton connective tissue. I was listening to you on another podcast, and you mentioned you worked at KB Toys.
Yes.
Was that the KB Toys in Steamtown Mall?
So I actually worked at the one at Steamtown and Viewmont. So I worked at the Viewmont one from it was weird. I interviewed maybe September 12th or 13th in 2001. So I remember that very vividly. It was right after 9/11. It was a day or two later, and I interviewed for the job. And I worked there until about 2003. And then I was transferred to the Steamtown Viewmont. And I was just unloading, the Steamtown Viewmont, or the Steamtown KB. And I was just unloading trucks. They moved me from the front of the store I was just unloading trucks at 4 or 5 in the morning. And I could tell I was not long for this world, that they were going to get rid of me soon. So I switched jobs then.
Okay. Now, I worked at Viewmont Mall in Old Navy.
Oh, wow.
Right up till... That was probably about March or February of 2002.
Oh my God!
And
wow.
then I got promoted to the Gap at Steamtown Mall, which was right across the hallway from KB Toys. So I'm sure we've probably connected at some point 20 years ago.
100%. I'm sure we're eating Bona Pizza in the food court.
When was our JCPenney days?
Oh gosh, that's 96.
Was that early?
Yeah.
That was before we went to state college. Okay.
Yeah.
I remember. That's how long ago. I know
Might
I
have been
worked
90.
for a little bit, but I just
actually that was 90. That was winter 95, I believe.
Was it?
Yeah.
Sounds about right.
Now, Sal, do you get a chance to come back often to Scranton and Northeast PA?
Yeah, I try and come back maybe once every year. It got really slowed down when the pandemic happened, but I was just back in December. So I went to all my old haunts. Yeah, I went to Cooper's and Arcaros, to be honest. So, lots of places in town I still really love. Some I've aged out of. Like I love the Bog in my early 20s, but I feel like I just it's like I can't do it, or maybe it'd be fine. Maybe it'd be totally fine for me to go. But yeah, a lot of places.
I haven't been in the Bog in years. And when I went, I only went like twice. Mm-hmm. So
it's been a long time.
I mean, a lot of good bars in Scranton and throughout the area.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have any?
I've left too, so I'm like,
yeah.
There's been a lot. Like, I mean, I remember I used to go to the what was the one? Oh my God, I used to go.
Tinks? Was it Tinks?
Well, no. Well, yeah, Tinks was one. Yeah, Tinks a lot. That. What was it? That retro bar. What the heck was that one too?
Flashbacks.
Yes. Oh, right there.
It was the one. It was. I used to go like every Sunday. God, it was Whistles. That's it.
Oh yeah.
All right. Well, all this drinking about bars. I'm drinking a Yingling Flight.
Classic.
I got the Miller Lite. I'm trying to get rid of it.
I'm drinking a water. It's very sad right now.
You're our designated driver, Sal.
There you go. Well, I have one question. Right. So, you said O'Hara, you graduated 2004, right? When did O'Hara change?
Well, that's a great question, because it must have been right after some point, because it seems almost immediately it was Holy Cross.
Yeah, that's.
I think 07.
Was it 07?
Okay.
Believe 07.
I didn't know if you were like the last class before it shut down or not. I mean, I knew it was. When you said 2004, I was like, oh, well, then it must have still been open for a little while after we left. So I feel like it changed like right after we left, but I guess it was a couple years after. So
yeah, maybe we must have been one of the last ones for sure.
Yeah, because Joey went. He was Holy Cross when he finally went, right, Brian?
Yeah, my son also graduated from Holy Cross in 2020.
Wow.
So he had Janine, he had Mrs. Wetter as well. So she's still going strong.
That's amazing. What a wonderful teacher, and what a lovely resource for the school.
Yeah. All right, well, let's move on, Sal, to the book. So the book is entitled The Neorealist in Winter, and it's a collection of 11 short stories. And one of the first questions I have for you, having previously published 2 novels, why you are focusing on the art of the short story?
That's a great question. So from the outside, it probably seems like, I just switched focus completely, but it's interesting. So the stories in the book are from the last 9 years of my life. So it's like I've been working on them in the background. So usually I'll be working on a novel, and then I'll take the draft and send it to someone for feedback. And I get too anxious if I'm not writing. I need to have a project. Like, I'm sure both of you are creative people, you're working on podcasts, you kind of can probably relate to this. Or like, I need to have something, or I will start to, my wife can tell, like, I'll be pacing the house. I'll just be getting more nervous. I'll fixate on weird things. She'd be like, so have you written anything? And, it's probably time, so I'd always have the stories working on in the back to work on in the background. So finally, I always kind of felt like they don't tonally fit together. And then it was only in the last 2 or 3 years where I'm like, okay, I think I now finally have about 10 or 11 that sync thematically, that would work as a book, where it wouldn't just feel like, here are 11 random stories I worked on. I wanted them to kind of feel of a piece. And yeah, it just felt like I had finally gotten there. So the oldest story is a story about what is clearly a Stan Lee type of character. And I started working on that in 2014. So, that's the earliest piece in the book. And then I think the last piece is probably the last piece in the book, which is, it's called The Last Train to Siena. And that was the last one I did, so I think it's interesting because they're both kind of about really similar things, but they're tackling them at really different kind of ways, so I think for me at least, I feel like, I made some progress and growth, even if the reader's getting them all at once, so they're not getting that decade-long arc.
Right. Now, I know at the back of the book, it looks like some of the stories have previously been published, but some of them are brand new to, being published, correct?
Yeah. So the title story has not been published. And then when I signed the contract for the book, so the book won a prize. So you basically submitted the whole manuscript to this contest, and it won the prize, and the prize was publication. But as of that point, probably the most recent 5 had not been published. So Electric City, I just found out that story is going to be published today in a journal, so that hadn't been published. And the Zeitgeist story, which is the first story, has never been published. And there's a few more. Last Train to Siena is coming out in a journal after the book launches, so a bunch of them are new, so it's not just all material people have seen before from me.
Right. Okay. And all right. So for me, I've read all the stories.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. And so I enjoyed them. I enjoyed the book. And I was like, when I sat down to read like the first story, I'm like, I'm going to take some notes and really read this critically and, see what he's doing as a writer and storyteller. And then by the end of each story, I'm like sucked into the story, and I'm like, I just like got caught up in the story itself. So that's a compliment to you as far as like how the stories are written and kind of just, like I said, suck the reader in to each story.
Thank you. I truly appreciate that, because no one has read it really. No, it doesn't come out till October. So I've heard very little from folks. So it's just amazing to talk with someone who's read it.
Yeah.
So I am not a reader. I mean, I was for a little bit. now I'm just like, I don't know, I just fell off, so I don't do anything. And then Brian sent it over to me, and he was like, try to read at least one. Can you just do one? And I'm like, all right, let me see. I read Electric City.
Oh,
I said this one takes.
And it was funny is I was reading it. I was like, I'm like, oh, like I know that place. Oh, I know that. Oh, I know that. I was like, and like Brian said, I did kind of get sucked in, and then at the very end, it kind of got me. I'm like, oh shit, that's not what I really thought the guy was gonna end up getting killed or something because of this money, and then I'm like, he's run away because he knocked up the chick. I was like, damn, I didn't know that. I'm like, I didn't see that coming. I was like, damn it. I was like, so I'm like, yeah, now I'm like, well, shit, I gotta go read the rest of them. So I got.
Thank you.
I did get sucked into it, so I'm like, yes, I did enjoy it very much. So
that's my sincerest hope, is I just suck you in, lower your defenses, and then boom, here comes the punch at the end.
Exactly. I enjoyed it.
All right, now, to me, having read all the stories, the kind of overriding, I think, in every, maybe not in every story, but pretty much, probably 90% of the stories, fatherhood seems to be a theme. Beginning with Electric City, dealing with some sort of issue of fatherhood. Even The Last Train to Siena is dealing with fatherhood. For you, was this kind of a conscious thing you were doing, or sort of a subconscious thing that over the last 9 years you realized, oh, I'm dealing with that, and what does it maybe reveal about yourself?
That's a really good question. I think it starts as subconscious, where I definitely didn't set out to write a story collection about those things. And then you look back over a couple of years and you're like, oh, I keep coming back to this thing. What's that about? And it's interesting to me because I have a pretty good relationship with my dad. I have a really good relationship with him. I just saw him. He just came to visit me. And when I was a kid, we spent a lot of time together. He coached my basketball team that I referred to, so it's not coming from that place, so what is it then? Because I've spent a lot of time thinking about, like, why do I keep coming back to it then? Because I don't think there's a ton to unpack there. I think growing up, I witnessed a lot of people in my family not having good relationships with each other. And that is kind of burned into my brain, so that keeps worming its way through. So even if I have a pretty good relationship with my parents, I think that family discord is something that's stamped on me, and it's something that I keep wanting to write more about, even if every time I'm like, I'm not going to write about this time, I just keep doing it, and to both of you, if I'm correct, our fathers, and I'm not a father, and I think about it a lot. So I'm kind of preoccupied with that idea of like, why aren't I a father? I've been married for 8 years, and I don't think it's going to happen, and so I think I get drawn in that way too, of imagining myself, and yet it's not there. So, with writing, it's like, okay, I can kind of imagine those situations. So a lot of them are from the son's point of view at the start of the book, or at least chronologically when I was writing the stories. And then like when we get to the last story, it's from the father's point of view, as I'm kind of maturing and kind of thinking about it from that point of view, even though I understand I know nothing about being a father, I can still try and imagine what the experience would be like. So yeah, I think it's really that. It's like those things that are stamped on you when you're a kid, you just keep going back to, as a writer.
Yeah. And like you said, kind of every story involves family in some way, and the drama between, the family members and that kind of give and take. And we'll get more into that as well. I was reading the stories. I'm like, reading it, I'm thinking, you kind of wonder, well, what kind of relationship does he have with his father? And then I did listen to another podcast you had done a few years ago. I'm like, well, it seems like he has a pretty good relationship with, with his dad. It's no like, turmoil or anything with that. But it's interesting how you keep going.
Yeah. And I think men are always writing about their fathers, and the father, for some reason, like I feel more comfortable writing father-son than I would feel mother-daughter, or some, there's a few stories that gesture towards that. But it's like when I want to write about family, which is often, I just find myself gravitating towards father-son because it's so easily legible, I think, for certain types of men, including myself. And then just thinking about like Italian American families too, and like, okay, the images you're fed are like The Godfather and Goodfellas and the big, loud kind of fighting families. So like, working through that too.
Right. Now, one of the stories that you wrote seems to be inspired from your, I think you taught abroad for a semester in Italy. And the funny thing that was striking me was, I guess you were in charge of this group. Was it like 30 students?
Yeah. So in real life, I was in charge of 30. So that's the story that is closest to the bone, of the one that, there's a lot in the back half that is not my life, but the setup is pretty close to my real life, which is I took 30 students to Rome. We lived there for 3 months. My wife came with me. I don't often, especially in Italy where people dress so formally, I don't often appear like I should be their professor, so then I learned to start, I gotta wear ties everywhere, I gotta wear sports coat everywhere, so there was some mishaps along the way.
And I'm reading that and then kind of reflecting, well, I knew you weren't a father, and I'm thinking, well, here he goes from having no kids and no parental responsibility to now he's responsible for 30, teenagers, young adults in a foreign country. How wild that must have been.
It was a lot because it's very different than you see them once or twice a week or 3 times a week versus we lived with them. So my wife and I lived with them in a building, and they were right down the hall, and they're in Rome, and they want to enjoy Rome in the way that 19-year-olds should enjoy Rome, and I encourage them to do that, all those things. But I was also like, man, they're pretty loud. Sure, wish they were a little quieter when I'm trying to sleep. But it was an amazing experience, and I'm actually going back in January just for 3 weeks with another group of 30 students. So I loved it. So it was an amazing experience, and I love going to Italy. And yeah, it's an incredible opportunity to be able to do that with my job and teach over there.
Now, have you been to Italy before that semester abroad?
Yeah, before that, I had been to the north. So I had been to Turin and Milan, but I hadn't been to Rome before. So then, I mostly spent the 3 months traveling throughout. And then I just went back I'd never been to Sicily. So my wife and I went 2 months ago. So I try and go a lot. But then the pandemic, obviously, we didn't go at all. So this is the first time, 2 months ago that we went back since everything. Okay. And we left Rome in December 2019. So cases had already started and we just didn't know, so we just barely, missed everything over there.
Okay. And I just kind of want to go over some of the stories, kind of, again, just to kind of go over some of the themes and stuff. Now, the course that you were teaching in Italy while you were there, it was a cinema class, like on Italian film?
This is amazing how art imitates life. So when I was there in real life, I taught a travel writing course. In the story, it's an Italian film course. But after I returned, I started teaching Italian film. And now I'm going to go back and teach Italian film. So it's all a blend,
Okay. So it's art imitating life, life imitating art.
100%.
All right. Now, one of the movies you mentioned in the Neorealist and Winter, Paisan, my son, who is at King's College, he's taking a summer course, and it's Italian neorealism cinema. And so that was one of the first movie he had to watch. Mm-hmm. So
that's an amazing film. Amazing. One of the all-time greats.
I did not watch it, but I'll take your word for it.
It clips along really fast because it's one of these movies where it's just like 5 stories. So it's like it's very episodic, so it doesn't feel like a 1940s black and white World War II saga. It's moving pretty quick.
Okay. We touched a little bit earlier on the Electric City, which of course takes place in Scranton, deals with fatherhood. And I don't want to a lot of the stories kind of have I'm losing my screen here, have sort of a sad a sad sense to them, or like sadder.
I would agree with that. I guess my, one of the things I think about is kind of what I alluded to a little bit, is I like to lure the reader in, give them some fun things. I like to oh, we're doing a pro wrestling, we're doing Vince McMahon's autobiography. Here's an oral history of a TV show that never existed. And it seems, we're lowering the defenses. And then I really want to rip out your heart. That's always my goal. So I always feel like if the story is just sad from start to finish, you're not as impacted as if I kind of get you in an unsuspecting way, so if I kind of come from the side. So that is generally my strategy with most things.
Okay. So I was reading that correctly then.
100%. 100%.
So I'm like, after every story, I'm like, oh, that's sad. Like, it's sort of like fatalistic or depressing, and I'm like, but the thing is, it's relatable. A lot of the characters, there's aspects of them that I can relate to, or I know people similar to them. So it's definitely, like I said, the stories just kind of pull you in.
Yeah, and I think, like, for me, it's so much of media exists to make you feel good, and I love that. I play a lot of video games. I watch pro wrestling. Pro wrestling doesn't make you feel bad. Pro wrestling makes me feel good. I went to see Barbie this week. I'm like, I feel great coming out of here, so, but with my work, I'm like, okay, well, I like the idea of doing the opposite, where it's just, I don't want to make people feel upset or depressed. I understand that's a side effect sometimes of what it is, but I want to really think about those things, sadness and depression, and just the tough parts of life that I feel like a lot of media can't get to, because that would go against what it's designed to function as a sitcom or something like that.
Okay. That's kind of a good segue then to talk about two of the stories. Do I Amuse You, which kind of revolves around a Goodfellas convention. That narrator deals with depression and anxiety. And then your other story, which one is it? The Faith Center. Mm-hmm. Also deals with, post-traumatic stress disorder, suicide. Talk a little bit about, I guess, incorporating those, how much of that, is part of your own life, if you care to discuss that.
Yeah, 100%. And I thank you for the question. Like, when I first started writing and publishing, my characters were always just a very kind of self-effacing and kind of filled with self-loathing without really knowing why. And, that's probably how I felt, in a lot of ways. And then, I think like a lot of people in the last couple of years, I started going to therapy, and, you just learn about all this stuff about depression. And I learned a lot about PTSD and all these things. And then I started, at first I didn't want to touch it in my writing, but then I thought, like, well, there's probably a lot of people wrestling with a lot of this stuff, and maybe I should start incorporating it. Maybe it's not something to run away from. Maybe the problem was running away, and not taking it head on, so I did start, incorporating a lot of it, so a lot of it is coming from, not the situations, so that type of thing I probably fabricate in most of the book. So almost the vast majority of the book is all completely fabrications. The things that are real are usually silly things that are real. Like, yes, I took 30 students somewhere, or that type of thing.
Right.
But the emotional truth of it is real, and I really wanted to convey that. So it's like, how do you grapple with, like, being depressed or having undergone trauma and then moving on with your life? So I didn't want the book to be a downer, maybe downers are a bad way to put it. I didn't want it to be artificially uplifting. I didn't want it to be artificially depressing. I wanted it to be very even keeled about, like, this is what it feels like, but life goes on, and for most of the characters, life will continue after what we've seen, you know, and they will after what we see in the stories, and they will persist, you know. And I think that there's something powerful in that for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely, see that. And like I said, the stories are realistic because everything is relatable, again, either to yourself or someone you know. So again, I think you do a really good job with that. Another sort of connective tissue from the Faith Center. You mentioned the Cafe Metropolis in Wilkes-Barre. And my wife and I, one of our first dates, I dragged her there to a show. My friend was in a band called Wonder Boy, and it was their last show. They were kind of breaking up, and so I dragged her to the show to go see my friend perform there.
That's amazing. I loved that club. I used to go there all the time. It was so shady and just dirty. And you were always hearing about people getting knifed outside. And yeah, it was awesome. I really loved it. It was very sad when it went away, you know, maybe like 15 years ago. But yeah, that place was great.
My wife has a picture because she would take her camera everywhere. But this was, 2002, 2001. The guy who like ran the board there, he had like a shirt and tie on with boxers. And he was like standing up on the desk, and she has like a picture of him.
We might have been at the same shows, because that's when I was going. It was right 2001, 2002, 2003, and 4, like right in that range.
Yeah. Oh, and the other question I had to ask you from the Faith Center, did you come out to wrestling theme music at your wedding?
No, it was the biggest regret of my marriage, I'll tell you. I can't believe I didn't know. So we had talked about me coming out to something, and I was going back and forth between like a rap song or wrestling theme music, and then at the end we didn't do it, and we kept it classier, but I regret it. And we did a bunch of like, Sal Payne weird things during the dance, where like, once the music was playing, it's all the kind of songs you'd expect. And then I played the Full House theme song, like stuff like that, where I'm like, I want to pull like weird stuff throughout. But we decided for the ceremony, all right, fine, we'll keep it a little classy.
Okay.
But I would have come out to Macho Man, and I'll tell you, when I graduated, you might have experienced this, Gary, in Catholic school, they're always having you graduate, and they played the graduation theme song in kindergarten, and I just started screaming Macho Man because I didn't know that was graduation music. I thought, I thought he was there. I thought he was gonna pop out.
Guest speaker.
Guest speaker.
He wasn't.
Well, that would have been the Professor Lenny Poffo, his brother.
Yeah, exactly.
And we'll get to more wrestling in time. Now, Sal, at the beginning of the book, you pull a quote from where is it? Well, it's in my other. I have all these notes. I can't find them here, but you just bear with me 1 second here while my computer refreshes. Of course, now it's not gonna.
Only you.
Okay, it's coming up. I think I have too many windows open.
Technology.
Such a pain.
All right. It's a quote from Natalia Ginsburg. And it says, "It was a village that knew nothing beyond its own misery." So I ask you, Sal, is that a direct shot at Scranton?
At my own hometown? No. So Ginsburg, she's an Italian writer, and the novel that's from is All Our Yesterdays, and it's about a town, and we just see it in about the 19-teens, and then it goes through fascism. So Mussolini rises to power, and they're kind of just overcome with their own misery. But then after World War II ends and they're liberated, the misery stays, and it's just not quite gone, and that's right from, I think, the end of the book. And I was thinking about that a lot with this book, where the characters are always deciding whether to stay or go, and they just keep bringing their misery with them, so it doesn't matter where they are. It's just following them around, so sure. Like, I definitely knew people who hate Scranton, feel like it's a prison. but I don't feel like that. I feel like generally, like, if you feel like that and you moved, you'd probably feel the same way there. Like the prison, we build the prison and we swallow the key. So me personally, like, I'm grateful I grew up in Scranton, especially compared to a lot of my friends who I met in college, where it's like Scranton had quite a bit to do. So I
Hmm.
I was always busy as a kid, like going to Cafe Metro, doing all this stuff. Like it was obviously had problems, and still does, and clearly, so there's that too. I don't mean to erase that, but no, I didn't mean it as a as an attack.
Yeah.
I would be more direct. I would.
Yeah. No, and I think like you're saying in the book, and again, some of these books take place in Scranton,
Mhm.
and so these people are kind of trying to escape. Um, and I think also some of the characters in your book, again, some who are from Scranton leave Scranton, and Gary does not live in Scranton anymore. He moved down to Florida, and I know a number of people who've left Scranton, and I think they had to leave Scranton because Scranton kind of confined or confirmed who they thought they were,
Mm.
where it didn't allow them to be who they were. And I was wondering for you, um, you've gone on, you're a teacher, you have a master's in writing. Like, do you think you would have been able to do that staying in Scranton? Or did you have to get out of Scranton to kind of s- stretch yourself and eliminate maybe expectations that other people had, or even your self imposed expectations if you had stayed in Scranton?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think people in Scranton could have easily done everything I've done without leaving Scranton, and people have done way more, who are from Scranton and stayed in Scranton. I think me personally, I probably did have to leave. I don't think I would have become like I don't think I would have felt like a full adult staying. I think I needed to go. Because I would have lived into those expectations of not just family, but friends, school. I loved the idea of going somewhere where I didn't know anyone and then being able to kind of reboot a little bit, and
Yeah.
do that. I think I always would have been the same person. I would have just been older, but I don't think that's true of everyone.
Yeah, and there are people who, grow up here and stay here.
Mhm.
Now, I didn't grow up really in Scranton. I didn't move here till I was, 17.
Mhm.
But now for the last 30 years, more or less, I've lived here. My wife and her family are from here. Um, so I've had experiences outside of Scranton, which I think helps me kind of appreciate Scranton for what it is.
Mhm.
But it's definitely its own little, like, there's something about Scranton.
Oh, 100%. And there's a lot of great things about it. And I always enjoy going back. I think I wouldn't if I lived there all the time, like it's that type of thing. But I think I probably felt like the characters in the story in the book where I'm like, oh yeah, I need to leave and escape, but then you escape and you're like, I don't feel any better. And then you realize like, oh, it's you. You are the problem. Like you've got to work on yourself more than thinking the external change is going to do it.
Yeah. One of the other stories I want to discuss with you is Take It Out of Me,
Mm.
which is sort of a sci-fi, and it's kind of a sci-fi themed story. And I just this past year started reading George Saunders. And this to me is a very George Saunders-esque short story, but I think it's actually better than some of the stuff I think it's better than most of the stuff he writes.
Wow. Well, that is extremely high praise. Thank you.
You know, because some of his stuff it's just kind of too out there, but I really enjoyed the way you put the story together. And it's again, it kind of goes back to your origins and background and um, sort of a whole like a I guess classism, like a working class versus the wealthy or academia, bourgeoisie sort of struggle. Is that something you kind of dealt with once you left Scranton and kind of maybe moving up into, higher levels of, society and academia and all that?
100%, 100%. So all the feelings of that story, a lot, well, not all of them, but many are coming from my real life where, my dad was he ran an auto body shop right on North Washington Avenue there, leading into actually right near Cooper's. Right near there, right near Scranton Prep and the Wendy's right there. So it was right there.
Okay.
And then my mom worked at Sears at Viewmont. So, we were very working class.
My wife worked at Sears.
Oh my God. Wow. So I wonder, wow, if there was any overlap there.
What department?
Swerval. It was like I'm trying to think what would the name of it be. It was sporting goods.
Okay. I'll have to ask her.
Yeah, and this would have been in the 80s and then the 90s, and then she switched jobs in the mid 90s, if I'm remembering everything correctly. But yeah, so I grew up really, really working class. My mom went to college, but nobody on my dad's side had gone to college. And but in Scranton, I didn't think of myself as working class. I just felt like, oh, we're just like everybody else. I thought rich people owned a above ground pool or a trampoline. Like, I'm like, that's the height of class. If you have a trampoline, like, you're set, So I never thought like I'm a part of the proletariat. Or if you lived in Clark Summit, I remember thinking, wow, these people from Clark Summit, they've got it just made. They must be like living in mansions up there. But then, I went to college at a small liberal arts college. And that's when I started to feel like, this is not tracking onto my experience. And then it intensified once I went to graduate school. And the way that the other students would talk about the working class as if it was the specimen to be discussed. And it was well-intentioned. They weren't cruel. It was just like, oh, you can tell that these people had not ever actually spoken with anyone who worked with their hands outside of paying them to do something, and it's like, that's not their fault. That's just the experience that they had. But then, being a professor now, I often felt like, wow, I have very, very few people I can talk to that have the kind of cultural touchstones of my youth, where none of them have that type of working class background for the most part. But when I go back to Scranton, I also don't quite totally fit in, even though I want to, I want to go to Whiskey Dick's and sit at the bar and just bullshit. But I also feel a little awkward there, having spent so many years out, and I just feel like, oh, is this a put on? Am I being fake, and all this stuff. So it's born out of that feeling like, well, you don't fit in either place, because you're part of the transition generation, who like probably, ended up in the middle class, but you don't really feel middle class. Like I don't think I'll ever feel really secure in the middle class. I'm always waiting for something to the other foot to drop.
Like in your short stories to come in from the side.
Yeah, like we just bought a house this year, and I think my reluctance was like, well, what if I get fired? And I have tenure, and still I'm like, but you don't know what could happen.
What happens?
Yeah, so my wife's like, you'll probably be fine. Like, all right.
The Zeitgeist Comics 1946 story. Now, as someone who is a huge fan of Mad Men.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm also, one of my favorite books of all time is The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay.
Me too.
By Michael Chabon. So this story is kind of like a perfect story if you enjoy Mad Men and The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay.
Thank you. I love both of those things. so that's right on the page for sure. I love Michael Chabon. I've read everything he's written. Cavalier and Clay is probably my favorite. It's either that or Wonder Boys, because I went to graduate school where Chabon went to undergrad, and the professor he's writing about in the book was my professor, So,
oh, really?
Yeah. So about 5 to 10 years later. So I was very, very close with him, the professor, not Michael Chabon. And yeah, I just loved him. So yeah, I love Chabon's work, and it's very, very meaningful to me.
Yeah. I especially Wonder Boys and The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay are like mind-blowing, good books. The Sidecar Cocktail. Let's ask Gary. Gary, what's in a sidecar cocktail? Do you know?
No, I've had one. I just don't
You
know what's in it right now. But I can look it up for you.
how did the sidecar cocktail end up in that story, Sal? Was that something you drink? Is that your favorite cocktail?
No, I'm very simple. I like bourbon on ice. I'm good to go, or beer. So I'm like a beer, bourbon on ice, I'm fine. If I'm at a classy place, an old fashioned, maybe, great. A sidecar, if you ask me, what's in a sidecar? I could not tell you right now what is in a sidecar. Where it got in the story because it's if I'm remembering this correctly, it's the protagonist is on a date with a woman, or he's trying to pick up a woman in a bar, and she orders a sidecar. And many years before I met my wife, I was maybe in a similar situation. And I remember a woman ordering a sidecar and just thinking, wow, much like the trampoline and the above ground pool and the Clarkson, I'm like, this must be the classiest woman I've ever seen. She's ordering sidecars in a bar. And always that image has stayed with me.
Okay. Yeah, it's a nice touch. It's stuck out to me. It's brandy and some sort of lemon juice and something else.
You could do it. You could do cognac, different brandy. We had one when we did the. Actually, Shannon had one when we went to that speakeasy. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
So yeah, it's cognac, orange liqueur, lemon juice, garnished with an orange twist or sugar rim. Yeah,
sounds good.
It's not bad.
Yeah.
One other question I had for you, sort of to do with the writing, is Catholicism. Obviously, we've touched on, both all of us graduated from Catholic high school, and there's threads of Catholicism that kind of run through each story, and just was wondering, like, how your faith, or if you have faith, that how it kind of impacts your writing and your teaching, sort of that angle.
The thing about it that I think has most impacted me is the imagery. So, you spend enough time as a kid, if you go to Catholic school, it's like so much of your time is spent going to the masses, and at an early age, and at an age where you're taking I was taught by a lot of nuns and that type of thing. You're taking it at face value, everything they say, or at least I did. I was 100%. Anything a nun told me at age like 7, 8, 9, I'm like, oh my God, we're all going to hell. I got to get home. It's all my parents. Like, we have to get to church this weekend, and panicking, like, we can't skip church. We will literally go to hell immediately. And all that imagery is just burned into my subconscious forever. So the brimstone and the cross and I always am referencing Saul on the road to Damascus in almost everything I write, to the point where, like, I have to cut it out because I've just used it too many times it's a shortcut for me to just use all the imagery of Catholicism. So I'm always using it. So I think the Eucharist, the transformation, and even like a lot of the stories absorb those elements of the idea of, like, we're going to transform a thing. And that's really the central tenet of why we're here on earth, and the goal. Almost all the fiction is always about that. It's like someone wanting to transform, and often failing to do so because they're not a holy being. They're just a person, and they're usually flawed people, so all that is just in all of everything I've ever written. And I think a lot about Scorsese, the director, because it feels really like that's obviously what he's doing, where the imagery of Catholicism is always in everything, either really overtly, like in Last Temptation of Christ, or even in more minor ways, like Age of Innocence or something, where you would think it wouldn't be there, but he gets it in. And I feel like, much like I'm always writing about families, I can't help always draw on Catholicism.
Now, did going to Rome, I'd imagine you took in a lot of imagery with churches and, masses maybe. How did going to Rome impact maybe even your idea or conception or faith that you have?
That's really interesting. I think the biggest thing actually was in Palermo, where my wife and I were just on the streets, and we saw a procession come by of, they're marching with the cross, and you know, it was like for Scranton, it was like a very solemn, serious St. Ubaldo Day type of situation where I'm like, oh, wow, they're like taking this very, very seriously. And it was this communal thing where they would walk through the streets and people would just glom on. They wouldn't even know what was happening. You'd see them see it, and then they'd just start following. And then we followed, my wife and I, we followed for, you know, an hour. And it was like, okay, wow, this is interesting how it's much more communal based. And yeah, I thought that was really great, you know?
I went to the St. Anne's Novena tonight.
Oh, wow.
Speaking of communal. So
Wow.
that was my first time. I've been living here for 30 plus years. Well, 30 years this year. And that was the first time I've ever gone to St. Anne's Novena.
Do you do the thing on Holy Thursday where you go to the three churches? Because that feels like such a Scranton type of.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did that all the time. All the time.
All right. Tell us, I have some more questions for you, Sal, but more off topic from the book, just to kind of catch up on writing and teaching and pro wrestling, obviously. Is tell listeners where they can find the book, when it's coming out.
Great. Yeah. So you can buy it directly from the publisher, which is autumnhousepress.org. It comes out October 23rd, but it's also probably in like any indie bookstore, you know, on their website. I know it's on Barnes and Noble's website and BAM Bookstore's website and Amazon. So it's at all those kind of places, you know. So whatever's easiest for you, it would be great. You know, shoot me a line if you read it. Let me know what you think. You know, leave a review on Goodreads. But yeah, that'd be amazing. So October 23rd is the launch.
Okay. And I will have links to the website for the book, as well as your website. So, you know, people will be able to find links there to get the book as well. All right. I want to, first of all, I know you lived in Indiana for a while, and my sister lives in Indiana. So I've made the trek from Scranton to Indiana. She lives in Westfield, which is just north of Indianapolis.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you've probably made the trip.
Oh, yes.
More than once. Any fun spots to stop on the way between Indy and Scranton?
Oh, wow. Okay, I'm probably going to forget something now, but I mean, the thing that is immediately coming to mind, I actually went with my dad. We stopped in Pittsburgh. This was when I was moving to Indianapolis, and we stopped right off the highway. There is a bar, which is my favorite bar in the world. It's the Squirrel Hill Cage, or the Squirrel Cage in Squirrel Hill. And they have cheeseburgers for about $2.50. You get a pitcher Yingling or a Yingling, whatever you want. You know, it's a great bar. You know, it's a very kind of just working class place. You see just, you know, workers there in the middle of the day. I love it. I love to stop there, get a cheeseburger, one beer, because it's a long drive after that, and just head on out. So that would be my stop every time.
Okay.
And it's almost, yeah, it's probably 5 hours from Scranton. So it's right when you're getting a little restless.
We usually stop in Clarion at the Eaton Park.
Yeah.
But
you got to stop at Eaton Park. I mean, if you get the opportunity.
They don't have them up here in Scranton. So once you have to go out west to Central. We've done the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton. We stopped at the Christmas Story House in Cleveland.
Oh, wow.
And I stopped last time. It was over Thanksgiving break. I stopped at Ohio State to see the Lego replica of Ohio Stadium for my son, who's my youngest son he was 7 at the time, but he loves Legos, but the library was closed. So but I'm always looking for somewhere to stop, you know, get out of the car, stretch your legs. All right, I have some writing. Squirrel Cage. I have it written down. Some writing questions for you, Sal, because I try to write. Obviously, I write Substack, but over the last, say, 6 months or so, I've tried to get more into writing my own short stories. How do you know when a short story is done?
Oh my God, what a question. I got to tell you, I basically had a breakdown like 3 weeks ago where the publisher sent me the proofs of the book. Now, this is a version that's edited even further than the version you read. And they were very upfront. They're like, please, we're just doing grammar. It's too late in the process. We don't want to add typos, like just do grammar if you see any typos. I made about 200 changes, and they had to call me and be like, look, it's done. I mean, the book's done. We accepted the book. You won the contest. People are reading it. Like you can't at this time be changing things. And they were right. It was what I needed to hear. So I wish I had better advice for you. I greatly struggle with this. I basically, what I do is I just try and get to a point where I'm just swapping, usually started or began. I usually get to a point where I just flip those between draft and draft, and like, oh, I gotta go through it one more time. Or I'm just switching words like that, moving commas around, and then I know it's done, and I'm just tinkering, and I'm just not helping anymore, and it's probably time to send it out. So then I like to just send it out, send it to a bunch of journals, so I can't touch it. But that's really just to keep me away from it more than anything else.
So do you start, or do you write the story knowing the ending?
Never.
Or do you kind of find the ending along the way?
Yeah, so I try to never know the ending. So plenty of writers do it, and I think they're great. And I read a lot of crime, and I think you obviously have to know the ending when you're doing crime, or especially mystery. And I know a lot of writers do the type of things that I do that also know the end. But for me, when I do, it always feels stillborn. It always just feels like, it feels like the writer made all the decisions. It doesn't feel like the characters made any choices. It feels artificial. So I try to just feel my way through. I try to know like the first 3 or 4 pages, and then just feel towards, like, I'll have ideas about where things are headed. Like, for example, in the book, there's a story, the last Train to Siena is it's set in the 70s, but a lot of it is in the Nazi occupation of Rome. And I didn't know it was going to end on a flashback. But once I got there, I'm like, it has to end on a flashback. And I didn't quite understand what the character was going to do. He goes to a train station. I'm like, I don't know what he's going to do once he's there. And then it'll, if the story's working, it'll just come to me, and it'll feel like, I describe it to my students as like writing is like a Ouija board. You're in control, but you have to trick yourself into believing you're not in control and letting the board take you where it wants to go. And that's usually when I know a story's close.
Okay. Now that brings me to my next question then, is plot. Is plot just a dirty 4-letter word for you? Because that seems to be the stories I write, and I'm sharing them with a friend. He'll ask me about the plot. I'm like, that's just the story I wrote. Like, kind of what you're explaining. Like, the story that came out is what came out, like, regardless of plot. Or if there is a plot, it's somewhere in there.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the plot is just a tool, right? So it depends on how you're using it. Like, I tend to not like things that are too heavily plotted, although sometimes I do. If I'll still read an occasional Star Wars novel. It better be heavily plotted. I want reversals and, tight act structure and that type of thing. And I think some literary novels are really good at working the machinations of plot. For me, in short stories, I like to just have one problem at the start, and it can be a minor problem. And usually that's enough for me to get in, and I usually want a story where the character by the end has to make a choice. So when I'm thinking of plot, it's a character who has to have some issue, usually in the first line. And then by the end of the story, they got to make a choice. And I don't always stick with that, but I'm hoping I usually am.
Okay. That's good sound advice for a way to start, at least.
Yeah.
All right. I have now one of your stories deals with pro wrestling. It's kind of loosely based on Vince McMahon, the former CEO. Maybe he's still the CEO with the restructure, but the head of WWE. Now, you currently live in St. Paul, which is kind of the heart of the old AWA territory. Any cool AWA experiences, or have you had any run-ins with legends or anything there?
So I haven't run into any AWA legends or things like that, but the pro wrestling scene here is nuts. And I would go to shows in Pittsburgh, and it was a very kind of sad indie show, where it's in like an Elks Lodge, and you know, people go to the top rope, they're hitting their head on the ceiling, and it's a little depressing. The people all look like they're about 80 years old, and I don't know how they're still doing what they're doing. Here, it's totally different. Where the shows I started going to in 2015, there's this guy named Airwolf. And I'm like, this guy's incredible. This guy's gonna really make it. And he's Darius Martin in AEW right now, you know. So it's amazing. Of like, wow, I saw that kid when he was like 18 or 19, and his little brother 14 or 15 selling shirts, and now these guys are in AEW, you know, fighting Chris Jericho and stuff like that. So there's always like great indie shows coming through, and all that stuff is great. There's definitely a love of the AWA here. So whenever you go to shows, you'll see people with the shirts. People have a great respect for the AWA, but a lot of those talents are gone.
So there's still kind of a hotbed of wrestling, because so many of the WWF, WWF, WWE wrestlers came out of that St. Paul, Minneapolis, the Road Warriors, Rick Rude, Kurt Hennig, Hulk Hogan was in,
Ric Flair,
Rick Martel, basically anybody spent at least some time in AWA.
Yeah, the people here who are wrestling fans are deeply entrenched in the history of Minnesota kind of pro wrestling. So the scene here is really crazy, where every week there's a show, and like Raw will be here, I think, in a week or two, so it's like, it's constant. It's at every level. It's like really tiny armories up to the kind of much larger shows.
Any plans to go to WrestleMania? Or I'm sorry, SummerSlam, because it's one state over, right?
I'm not going to SummerSlam, but I just read that WrestleMania might be here, and God, that would be amazing, because I will travel for wrestling. This is like one of the saddest things to reveal about yourself on anything, but I went to Japan to go to, one of the main things I wanted to do was go to Cork and Hall and see New Japan Pro Wrestling.
So you've been there. That's cool.
Yeah, so it was amazing, and I'm like the one gaijin in there with Kenny Omega shirt. I'm like, this is absolutely incredible. So yeah, I will definitely travel for pro wrestling very happily.
How different is the Japanese crowd to the American crowds?
It was wildly different. It was, it was a lot of just businessmen and women in suits and just very formal attire. They ran a whole video telling you, don't yell, don't get too animated. And this is well before, the pandemic, where I know they're not really cheering and doing that much stuff, but they're like, don't cheer, polite clap like you're at golf, fine. So it was radically, no children, there's no young kids. It was really interesting.
That is interesting. Now, as a writer, one of the current storylines in professional wrestling is the bloodline, with Roman Reigns and his cousins Jay and Jimmy Uso, and Solo Sikoa, Paul Heyman. Have you been following that story?
Okay, I've been following it on YouTube, but this is another sad thing to admit. I pretty much got pulled into AEW, and that's kind of the primary thing I watch now. So I watch that every week, and WWE I've fallen off a bit, even though that's what I grew up watching. The tail end of Hogan, the New Generation, the Attitude Era was like, that was my height. And then I came back in when I think it was 2015, when Seth Rollins cashed the briefcase, and I watched everything for about 5 or 6 years. And then slowly but surely I got pulled into New Japan and Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks. And then that led to AEW. So now I check in with WWE during the big paper. So I'll watch all the big shows still. But I'm not often watching week to week. But when there's, everybody was talking about the bloodline, so I made sure to watch all the videos of Sami Zayn and all the stuff leading up. Okay.
And then that leads me to the other question I had for you, because you wrote a video game called Retromania.
Yes. Yeah, Retromania Wrestling. Yes.
Okay, so tell people about that, and tell people what that was. And
yeah, it was a great experience. So it's an arcade wrestling game. So it's very much like, if you remember, in the late 80s, there was a WWF game called WrestleFest. And, it's a Mr. Perfect, Hogan, Warrior, all those guys. This was basically an update. So what would that look like for modern audiences? So I saw just on Twitter that indie team was putting it together. And I just wrote to them. I said, man, this looks amazing. I'm going to buy it day one. If you need any writing, I'm sure you don't, get in touch with me. And they did. And they wanted to see a sample. I sent them the Vince McMahon story that's in the Neorealist book. I just showed it to them just to be like, here, I definitely know a lot, way too much about pro wrestling than any human should know. So they hired me and they just asked me yeah, well, what would you do in a story mode? And I pitched them this idea where, you'd be making choices and you could play as a heel, you could play as a baby face, you'd cut promos, you'd switch sides, you'd betray factions, and always giving the player the choices. So I wrote all the different paths, try to make it make sense for whatever the player wanted to do. And I still do writing for it now. So they're still updating it. It came out in 2021, but they still release updates for it. And every once in a while, they'll write me and be like, can you write some commentary notes? Can you add a little more? So I'm hoping maybe there'll even be a larger part to the story mode in a couple of years.
Cool. Yeah, that's a neat little gig that you have there.
Yeah, it's incredibly fun. Yeah. Just, write promos for the Road Warriors. They're in the game. People like that. It's just awesome.
All right. I know you don't get to probably enjoy that much of the summer hours in St. Paul, but we're going to do News of the Weird, and then I'll just have a few more questions for you, and then we'll let you go.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Gary. And now it's time for News of the Weird with your host, Gary McDaniel. All right, we'll go live to the Tampa newsroom. And Gary, what's news?
The Big Peanut once again reigns at the roadside in Georgia after hurricane felled earlier goober. Georgia's Big Peanut is back. The roadside landmark along Interstate 75 in South Georgia was rededicated Thursday, nearly 5 years after an earlier version was felled by the winds of Hurricane Michael. This time the giant goober is made of sheet metal, not fiberglass. It's a symbol of pride in the heart of South Georgia's peanut belt, as well as an enticement for tourists to pull off the highway in a small town of Ashburn. The Ashburn-Turner County Chamber of Commerce raised nearly $80,000 to replace the giant ground nut, which had saluted motorists since 1975 until it was blown down in October of 2018. The majority of the money came from the Georgia Department of Agriculture, although Turner County residents also raised thousands. The peanut atop a brick pedestal has come to symbolize the county of 9,000 people, which is halfway between Macon and the Florida state line. I think it represents home, said Ashley Miller, the Chamber's executive director. I know it's a small town, but when you say, have you seen the peanut? That's me. But it's also a fitting tribute to peanut farmers in a country where almost everyone is touched by agriculture. Community leaders spent about $70,000 to replace the peanut, holding the remaining money for maintenance. They hired Cole Spurser of Surser Machine and Fabrication in nearby Rebecca to make the new peanut.
Now, does Wilkes-Barre still have a Mr. Peanut statue? Is there a statue?
Yes.
Okay. I'm checking with my son, who's in the studio audience here, because anything you can find in the world, Scranton has one, or the Scranton Wilkes-Barre area has one.
I'm sure. All right. And our next story is.
That was nuts.
Yeah.
You don't have to laugh at that. That was terrible.
I'm sorry.
Sal's a quick learner.
Uh-huh. And our second story tonight is annual Hemingway lookalike contest begins in Florida Keys. Almost 140 bearded men who resemble Ernest Hemingway converted on Key West, the late author's home during the 1930s, to compete in the Hemingway lookalike contest that began Thursday evening. The challenge is a highlight of the island's Hemingway Days festival that salutes the literary talent and adventurous life of the Nobel Peace Prize winner. I'm sorry, Nobel Prize winning writer. During his Key West years, Hemingway penned classics including For Whom the Bell Tolls and To Have and Have Not. The three-night look-alike competition is held at Sloppy Joe's Bar, where Hemingway often spent time with local and literary friends. Closely observed by a judging panel of previous winners, including 22's John Avil of Dade City, Florida, contestants take turns pontificating and parading across Sloppy Joe's stage. Many are repeat contenders who bring their own cheering sections, and most attempt to copy the Papa persona and appearance adapted by Hemingway in his later years. The contestants' second preliminary round is set for Friday, the 124th anniversary of Hemingway's July 21st birthday, and the 23 winner is set to be chosen Saturday night. Hemingway Days continue through Sunday with events including a quirky Running of the Bulls spoof, a street fair, and the Key West Marlin Tournament that recalls the author's passion for Florida Key fishing.
Now, did you go to Sloppy Joe's, Gary, when you were there?
I did.
Oh, you were there.
I was.
So you and Papa Hemingway bellied up to the same bar.
Yeah.
Think of that.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I didn't go to the bar, but. And that's it. That's news.
They brought the drinks to you, right?
Yes. Yeah, we had a waitress. But that's fine. I didn't realize that he used to go to that bar. Now, my wife and son and mother-in-law did do the tour of the house.
Right.
So, but yeah.
All right, Sal, are you more of a Fitzgerald guy or a Hemingway guy?
My mom is a hardcore Fitzgerald fan. I go back and forth. There was definitely a period where I much preferred Hemingway, and I'm probably in the middle now. I think my problem with both of them is really with Hemingway is the cult around him. Where like even this stuff of like, you're going to dress up like Hemingway is so weird to me. But like, so I end up feeling like down on both of them because of the cult status around them. But I like them both. I mean, it's hard to go wrong with The Great Gatsby, but I love Hemingway short stories, so it's tough.
Yeah. I don't know. It kind of depends on what mood I'm in.
Yeah.
Who I would pick. Obviously you have a cat named Martin Scorsese. You mentioned, Scorsese plays a role in at least one of the short stories of the new book. If you had to pick a Martin Scorsese film, which one would it be?
Oh, Goodfellas every day, all day.
Okay.
No question whatsoever. Yeah, I love so many of his films, and I think some of the best ones are ones that are unexpected. Like Age of Innocence, I think is a masterpiece that people don't talk about because they want to pigeonhole him as crime, gangsters. Age of Innocence is amazing, and I think Wolf of Wall Street is great. I mean, obviously Raging Bull, King of Comedy. So I'll just start listing all of his movies now. Even his first movies, like Who's That Knocking on My Door, I think is incredible. And Mean Streets.
I just watched Mean Streets for the first time a few weeks ago. And it's really interesting. Like you could tell it's one of his first films. It has that 70s feel to it. But yeah, you could definitely tell there was talent there.
Oh yeah, and just I like it all. Like Bringing Out the Dead with Nick Cage, and I love The Irishman. So there's almost I'm trying to think if there's one I don't like. There must, I haven't seen New York, New York. That's on my list. I haven't seen New York, New York, and Shutter Island, unbelievably, because it seems like most people have seen Shutter Island. And then Hugo might not be my cup of tea, but that's clearly a kid's movie, so it's not for me, and that's okay. But Goodfellas is just my favorite.
Now, just to compare that to now, it's crazy. I've never seen any of the Godfather movies, which is like crazy. Is Goodfellas to you higher level than The Godfather? Or where does that rank? Because I know you're kind of an Italian American film noir expert.
Well, Well, I think the way I would put it is Goodfellas is my favorite of those three movies, but Godfather is probably better.
Okay.
But I can concede that it's probably a better movie. And it's first. Godfather 1 and 2 are before. But yeah, for me, it's going to be Goodfellas. But I mean, I was just talking. I'm in a film club where we meet every week and watch a film and discuss. And we were just going over our top films ever. And I said Goodfellas 1, 8.5 was 2, then Do the Right Thing, then Godfather 1 and 2 right after. So.
So in that book or in the story, Do I Amuse You? Goodfellas kind of helps that character, it seems like, through kind of episodes of his life. Is there a film like that, or has Goodfellas been that kind of film for you?
It's definitely Goodfellas. So that's another one where that one's pretty close. At least the character's relationship to Goodfellas. I would watch it over and over and over and over, and just, it makes me, I don't, how can I put this? Like I talk with my parents frequently, but I don't have a lot of contact with the kind of large Italian family that is so stereotypical. And when I watch Goodfellas, I feel connected to something that reminds me of youth and family. And I couldn't have articulated that when I first started rewatching it over and over, but I think that's the appeal.
Okay.
Not that my family are gangsters or anything, but just, like the shots of garlic being sliced and the sauce and all that stuff is evocative.
Yeah. That's kind of how Cocktail is for me, the movie Cocktail.
I love that movie. Yeah.
I just watched it last week. The Knicks, you're a big Knicks fan. You have your Knicks shirt on. How do you end up as a Knicks fan growing up in Scranton, PA? Is it Mr. Calais, or is it go deeper than that? Rick Pitino.
Oh my God. Mr. Calais, that's funny. I have a distinct memory of watching the Knicks all the time on TV. And for some reason, I recall that we got the Madison Square Garden network. I don't know if that's true or if that's just a memory I've fabricated, but that's kind of what I remember. So I remember just watching them all the time. And I just got really into the John Starks, Patrick Ewing, Charles Oakley, early 90s, mid 90s team. And they would just hit people. And that really spoke to me for some reason. I hated Jordan, and I liked that they were just hitting them. And they never won, they always lost to him, and that was okay. But yeah, so I've been a diehard fan ever since. They've been awful my whole life. Sometimes they're mediocre. Right now, they're in a mediocre to good time, which is amazing. But yeah, they let me down more than anyone.
Yeah, they kind of brought the WWF attitude to pro basketball for a time there. Now, to be honest, I haven't really watched basketball closely, probably since like the 2004, 2005 season. Is modern day NBA as bad as I think it is, or is there an argument you can give to me to watch it?
I would really give it a shot. I think that they have done a lot to make it the fastest paced it's ever been and the most offense based it's ever been. So I think a lot of people like myself who grew up with a different type of basketball romanticize it. And I'm always like, I miss the Knicks of the 90s. And then, you can watch those games, and I watch them. I'm like, oh my God, this is unwatchable. It is a 72-68 rock fight. No one can shoot from the outside. It's nothing but, just running plays from the elbow and posting up. We're just posting up every possession and then fouling the ball handler constantly. And then you compare it with now, where it's all freedom of movement. I think the Warriors are the best case for why it's so entertaining now. It's just up and down the court, hitting threes. I think it takes an adjustment to get used to, wow, they're going to pass up an open layup for an open three is still hard for people my age and up to like wrap your mind around, because it's just like it breaks everything in your body to think he had the open layup. But once you just give yourself up to it, I do think it is pretty entertaining.
Yeah, it seems like they need to maybe strike, like you're saying, sort of a middle ground from that 90s style play to today's open. Because to me, it feels like there's such a lack of defense
Oh yeah.
that it to me, it strikes me as like, here's 10 millionaires in a gym playing a pickup game of basketball, like you would go down to the YMCA and watch,
Mm.
as far as like the physical effort put forward.
Yeah, it depends. There's some stuff that's tough. The labor, the load management is kind of tough, that stuff.
Yeah.
But there's, I think, enough teams out there where if you just fixate on those, like the Knicks coach is in the completely other way, where he'll play his guys 38 minutes a game, every single game, even though every scientific metric tells you, please don't do this. And he just does it, so it's like he's giving you that, but it might not always work out in the end.
That's Tom Thibodeau, right?
Yeah.
He's kind of an old school coach.
Yep.
Trying to adjust to the current day. All right. It's been about an hour and a half. Sal, I told you we'd be on for an hour, so I want to thank you for staying on a little bit longer to talk to us. Do you want to tell people, do you have any other projects coming up? Anything you're working on, or what's next for Sal Pane?
First off, just thank you so much for having me on. I mean, this was an awesome conversation. I really like talking with both of you guys, and the questions were amazing. And anytime you want to have me back, please, I'd love to come back. So this is great. And for me in the future, I don't know. I'm writing in the background, but I don't have anything lined up. So right now, I guess the big thing is when this book comes out, I'm hoping to do some book readings and tour events in different cities and things like that. I don't have.
Are you going to be coming home to Scranton maybe for reading?
That's being discussed. So yeah, I think I'll the publishers in Pittsburgh. So I'm definitely going to do Pittsburgh. So, and I have read in Scranton's before. I read at in Scranton. I'm blanking on the name of the bar. It's a great bar. It'll come to me 5 minutes after we get off the call. Oh, it's Jack's Draft House. Jack's Draft House.
Oh, Jack's Draft House. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I love going back to Scranton, and I'm hoping the Times Tribune will review my book in Scranton, or the Times Leader. I always forget what it is, but yeah. So we'll see. So yeah. So hopefully some readings.
Okay. Well, I will do my part promoting it here. Like I said, this will be coming out this week, and maybe closer even to the date we'll replay it or pop it up again. The title of the book is The Neorealist in Winter. By Salvatore Pane. It's available through Autumn House. Is it the Autumn House?
Autumn House Press.
Autumn House Press. All the links are going to be attached in the show notes. So check that out. Check out Sal's Twitter account. There'll also be a link to that, as well as his website, salvatore-pane.com. Again, Sal, thanks so much for joining us and sharing the stories with us and sharing your story with us. And like I said, I really enjoyed reading the book and wish you much success going forward. And I'm looking forward to. I'll probably catch up with your 2 other books, and I'm looking forward to what else you have creatively in the future.
Thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate it.
All right, that's going to do it for us tonight on the Brian Lennon Show. My name is Brian Lennon. As always, thank you to my co-host and producer extraordinaire, Gary McDaniel. And thank you again to our guest tonight, Salvatore Pane.
Peace out.